Welcome back. As we continue our discussion about accountability, I want to talk with you specifically about having the accountability conversation with an employee. This is important to talk about because, of course, this is where many managers falter. They don't want to have the conversation. They recognize that someone is or isn't performing well, but they're not comfortable with how to address the situation and provide constructive feedback. In this segment, you'll learn some general strategies for providing good feedback to employees, both when they're doing well and when a performance gap exists. We'll also tie back to the thought model discussed in the first course of this specialization and talk about how it's vitally important to stick to the facts and results rather than our own opinions. As a part of this, we'll go over a 6-step process you can follow when having the accountability conversation. We talked a little bit about feedback in that other video that I created for you about how to give feedback. In this one, I really want to reiterate some of those key points and also kind of help you step out of your own perspective when you're giving feedback. Because here's the truth, your perspective isn't really relevant when we're giving feedback. What's relevant are the facts, okay? So if someone is not meeting an expectation in a job, then we have to hold them accountable, have that conversation regarding whatever it is that they are not meeting the expectations around, okay? So some things that we want to keep in mind as it relates specifically to the conversation. And let's talk about first when someone does a great job, because that's also an accountability conversation, right? So when someone does a really good job and their commitments are achieved, we want to offer substantive feedback. And we want to provide real observations of their work. So when someone does well, we want to not just say, hey, great job, but hey, great job, and here's why. I love how you thought this through and came up with multiple responses. I'm really impressed with the level of thinking you brought to this project. The outcome that we got from this work that you've done is going to greatly impact the people that we work with every day, right? Connect their work to something. Don't just tell them they did a good job, right? Then, second, ask employees to reflect on how they achieved their success. So don't just talk at them. Ask them, hey, you did an amazing job on this project. I'm so impressed with how well it's going. How do you think you were able to do this, right? And then third, ask them to reflect on why they believed they achieved their success. So the how and the why, right? How have they done it and why did they even care to do such a good job? The reason that's so important is it helps them visit their own success. And then when they're struggling on a project in the future, they can tap back into what worked for them. And honestly, it can be very good information to share with other employees who might want to do as well as someone else, okay? So that's the kind of conversation to have with someone when they're doing well. Offer them substantive feedback, ask them how they achieved their success, ask them why they believe they achieved their success, and then help them kind of revisit those ideas and those thoughts that they have so that they can call upon those in the future. Because remember from our previous course, what you think about comes about. So the thoughts that people have are what drive their results. Their results don't drive their thoughts. Okay, so keep that in mind. So when we're talking to someone about a performance that doesn't go well, we have to have a similar approach, but we're going to break it down a little bit more just to help you, right? And the first thing I really want to emphasize is that performance is not an opinion. Performance is a measurable outcome. Okay? The reason why so many managers struggle on giving feedback is because they get caught up in their own perspective and their own opinion and their own judgments. And then that actually shows up in the conversation. And that's where defensiveness can come in and you have lack of evidence. And so the conversations can get pretty wiry because we're not clear about what we want to talk about. We think that we need to give people our opinion to persuade them to understand why we think they aren't doing well. But performance should just be simply easy to measure, okay? It isn't an opinion. So when we want to give people feedback about a performance gap, there are a few key elements we always need to make sure that we're clear on. The first one is the facts. What are the facts related to this person's performance? You either do or you don't do something, right? There's no like maybe. There's either you did or you didn't. So you can think about that. There's so many things that we can look at in terms of performance. There are numbers that we can calibrate. Did they or did they not meet the numbers? There are due dates that we can look at. Did they or did they not meet the due dates? There are conversations that they should have. Did they or did they not have the conversations? There are outcomes that they are supposed to get. Did they or did they not get those outcomes? So anything that people do every day at work can be measured in terms of their data, whatever that data is, okay? So the first key for you as a manager is to get clear about what are the facts that you want to talk about with this employee. What are the facts that you want to talk about with this employee? The second is what are the impacts? What is the impact of this employee's performance or gap? So here are the facts. You were supposed to contact 20 new clients this quarter. You contacted 10. What is the impact to the employee, to the team, and to the organization based on that performance? Another fact could be you were to deliver this project by the 15th of the month. You delivered it on the 25th. What is the impact to the employee, to the team, and to the organization based on that performance gap? Okay? Impact is essential because it's not just that you didn't do it, it's that you didn't do it, and here's actually what's happened as a result, right? Third part of this conversation is we have to let the employee discuss their perspective. Now, this is also a part managers don't like. They don't like the employee to have the opportunity to discuss because that's when all this defensiveness starts, right? But I want you to really think about it this way. If you are truly rooting your feedback in fact, they can have any perspective they want, but facts don't lie, right? So the analogy I use all the time is, let's say that I ask you to please bring me an orange pen, and you bring me a black pen. And I say, well, this is a nice black pen, but I asked for an orange pen. Now, you might say, yeah, I know you asked for orange, but I really think black is going to be more effective. It's a stronger color. You can see it on more documents. I don't really know why you wanted orange. I mean, I think black is probably better. Now, my perspective as your manager is you can have that opinion that you think a black pen would have been a better option, but I asked you for an orange one and you didn't bring that to me. So I don't need to argue with you about whether or not this black pen is better or worse than the orange pen. All I need to do is say, yes, I understand your perspective. I asked for an orange pen and you didn't bring it to me. I'm going to hold you accountable for the performance gap. I wanted an orange pen. You brought me a black one. I don't need to debate that with you. The problem is because so many managers root their feedback in opinion, and then when it gets to time to discuss with the employees have lots of room there. If it's your opinion, if their performance is your opinion, you can't stand in that firmly. But if your feedback is based on facts, there's no need to have an argument. You can argue with me all day that you think a black pen is better than an orange one, but I didn't ask for a black pen. I asked for an orange one. Right? So don't worry so much about that piece, but that's the reason that gets so difficult for people is because they worry that they haven't really rooted the feedback in facts. That's where we get tangled up. The next step, the fourth step, is defining the consequence if the behavior doesn't change. So using my pen example, if the next time I ask for an orange pen, you bring me a black pen, I will document that in your file. If the next time you miss the project deadline of the 15th, I will not put you on a future project. If in fact you are late to work one more time this month, you will no longer work for the organization. whatever. I mean, consequences can be, they don't have to be firing people. They don't even have to be writing people up. They can be changing their work, moving them on a new project, not inviting them to a particular work meeting. So please remember that consequences aren't just firing people, but what's essential is that you define the consequence in advance if the performance gap doesn't improve. All too often, this is the piece that most managers overlook. They don't do this part because it's uncomfortable, right? For me to tell you what I'm going to do if your behavior doesn't change or if your performance doesn't improve. But you have to do that because otherwise people don't really think it's a big deal. They have to know that it is meaningful, and that's why the consequence is so important. Step 5 is to document that conversation. You've got to document it. It doesn't mean it has to go to HR. It just means write it in an email as a summary, just to summarize our conversation. Here's what we talked about. Here's your performance. Here's the impact of your performance, and here's the consequence if things don't improve. And then you've not just had a conversation, but you've anchored it in some documentation, because I think we can often misunderstand one another. Very well-meaning people can misunderstand one another. So documenting it and summarizing it is key. And lastly, we want to schedule time for follow-up. So when I'm in this meeting with you, if your performance gap has been that you've been late to work, I'm going to meet with you next Thursday at 2:00 to see how you're doing on getting to work on time. If your performance gap is that you've been missing benchmarks, I'm going to meet with you next Friday at 1 to look at your progress on your current benchmarks. Schedule the follow-up with your employees in this meeting. Okay? Again, if there's one area that managers tend to fall down on and not follow through on is the follow-up. They think sometimes that the conversation is enough. And sadly, we know it isn't. And so if you loop it and they know that they're going to have to meet with you next Friday, it's firm, it's on their calendar, they're much more likely to execute and move forward on the commitments that they've made. Okay? So we want to identify the facts. We want to talk about the impact of the gap, the facts, on the individual, the team, and the organization. We want to give the employee an opportunity to share their perspective. We want to talk about the consequence if the behavior or the performance doesn't improve. We want to document the conversation, and we want to schedule a follow-up so that we know that there's time to revisit it. That's how we have that conversation, and hopefully that will really help you and prepare you for those conversations in the future.